The 5 domains of well-being, well, before we get there, let's just talk about what we mean by well-being. Because we are all hardwired for well-being, it is the experience of feeling whole, collectively and individually. And it turns out it feels so good to feel whole because it's our way, our sort of bodies and nature's way of telling us, you are getting what you need to be healthier, to be more hopeful, to be more resilient. And so well-being comes from access to a combination and balance of certain needs and experiences. So what are those needs and experiences? And what is this combination and balance? Well, this is on the left is what we call the 5 domains of well-being as a start. They are non-hierarchical. No one is more important than the other. And they are interdependent. Sometimes the best way to be safe is actually to increase your connections. Meaning matters. And that's really important for well-being, is to really understand that housing may be the way I meet my need for it may be a relevant resource for me, but for someone else, getting housing actually may be about safety, maybe about something else. And understanding that the drives are the same, but the ways that we meet them are so different across cultures, even within a family. And that's really important because the other part of this is how much context and environment determine the spaces and places we are in, and the histories of the places we're in really determine our access to well-being way, way more than individual choice and behavior. And so we need to pay attention to systems and context. And that's the needs and experiences. Just as important as the combination and balance. That our well-being doesn't come from maxing out each of these. It comes, and it doesn't come from having all of our assets in any one domain. It comes from having enough and kind of the jostling between them to add up to that feeling of being whole. And we are balancing them in part through balancing this idea of trade-offs, which is this idea that most of the time when we are sort of building assets in any one domain, there's a cost to it. Different costs, some are a lot, some are a little, but there are trade-offs to any sort of forward motion that we make, anything in our life that is accumulating assets and well-being. What are these needs and experiences? Let's dive a little deeper. So first is connectedness, relationships and linkages, but not just with other people, with places and spaces and experiences that we've had, and also with nature is really, really important. And our sense of belonging, yes, it comes from being with people where we share some identity, like this being a community where we all share a commitment to a fair shot at well-being. But it can also come from feeling part of something bigger than us. It comes from that feeling of awe. And it also comes from something that certainly doesn't get enough attention in our culture, which is feeling linked to our ancestors and feeling linked to generations to come, feeling linked to history and places that may feel like home, even if we haven't lived there, but they're where our people come from. And that sense of belonging is incredibly important across time as well. We're all hardwired for stability, which includes rhythms in time, like anchors, the daily and weekly routines that we have that make us feel like everything isn't chaotic, but also events and things that occur on a fairly predictable schedule. Because if we don't have that, then we have to monitor everything all the time and be vigilant. There also are patterns. Our sense of stability comes from patterns in space. What does that mean? Well, what that really means is that I think of it as, can I find the bathroom in the middle of the night without turning on the light, right? Can we anticipate what the space around us is going to look like and what it's going to be like, right? Again, we don't have to monitor all the time. And when we don't have to monitor all the time, what that also means is that if there's some ding that happens in our life, we miss a bus, we miss a call, we miss a something, it doesn't set off this extraordinary cascade. Because again, if we are constantly have to worry about everything being so tightly wound, all we can do is focus on the present. It's not so good for our well-being. Our safety is about, can we express our core identities, which may be about identities like demographics, but there are also lots of other things that we identify as. And it's important to understand that safety is, yes, it's about avoiding pain, but it's also about avoiding shame and fear or danger, and that actually there's not a whole lot of distinction between emotional and psychological pain and physical pain. We need to matter. We need to feel that we matter, that we can be significant, that something is different in our relationships, in our environment, in our futures, because we were here. That we could be a group, it could be just us, and that we can make a difference. And that feeling of significance doesn't generally come from control. It comes from influence. We're a social species. We need connectedness, and influence is an inherently social thing because it's about like our bond with each other and our relationship and that sort of dance. And so mattering is really, really about how much influence and how do we have influence in places that feel important to us and where we really can feel like we are something, as I said, is different because we were there. And this means that we also need to feel some correlation between efforts and outcomes. And that it's not just about self-efficacy though, and our skills, that it's also super, super important to recognize that social positioning really is a big determinant of our ability to matter. And that some voices matter more than others. And sometimes we can sort of use that to our advantage, like who's going to be the messenger, et cetera. But the reality is also that there are lots of times where someone may feel like they did something and it didn't get recognized. And then somebody else who has a different social positioning, a different identity, does exactly the same thing, and it is recognized. And I think that that's a perfect example of where mattering isn't just about the thing, it is about the social interaction and what the impact is on others around us. And we need relevant resources, which are, yes, they're food and shelter, but it's air and water, and we need rest. But we also need to be able to have exercise. Movement doesn't mean exercise. It means we need to rest and we need to be awake and we need to move and we need to be able to sort of have those rhythms in our life. And do we have those in ways that are relevant to us, that meet our cultural needs, our biological needs, our situational needs? And of course, these resources aren't service. And we need meaningful access to each and every single one of these 5 domains of well-being. The combination and balance comes from this idea of trade-offs, the immediate and long-term well-being costs of a decision or an inaction. It's not the only way the combination and balance comes in, as I said, but the trade-offs are really important. They exist at the community level and at the personal level. And really at the heart of it, the idea of a trade-off is we are weighing this question, is it worth it to me? Or is it worth it to us? Because it may be worth it to somebody else. And we tend to assume that we know what is going to be worth it to somebody else or to another community or another group. They always exist. They are not bad. The goal is not to eliminate trade-offs, but it is to understand them, because we actually sustain change when the trade-offs are worth it. And when the trade-offs don't feel worth it to us, it doesn't stick nearly as much. Systems and services tend to force what we call unsustainable trade-offs, which are when the losses, the trade-offs are greater than what is gained. And so many of our systems and services in our society is set up to only focus on what the forward movement is and to really discount the trade-offs that come with it. And so unsustainable trade-offs are put on the person instead of on the authority that is forcing the unsustainable trade-offs. And so moving towards a fair shot at well-being also means understanding not just the sort of the domains, but actually how they are interacting in different people's lives and what people are holding on to that's so important. Because this isn't just about motivation, and motivation is important, but people can be incredibly motivated to do things. Groups can be incredibly motivated to move so that they are avoiding flooding, to do something else, but the trade-offs don't feel worth it to them. And we need to be able to distinguish collectively and individually between motivation and trade-offs, because the harms that we can inflict on each other when we just assume that something is a lack of motivation is actually really gets at the heart of mattering and of well-being. And so we also want to really emphasize this importance between motivation and trade-offs.